Breaking tonight, a bombshell new report raising concerns that the Obama administration, quote, miscalculated the Russia threat, allowing Putin to launch years of attacks against the United States, tampering with everything from our economy to our elections, and ultimately leaving Americans vulnerable even at this very moment. Good evening, I'm Trish Regan, in for Martha McCallum. The explosive report from the Washington Post is best summed up by its title: Kremlin trolls burned across the internet as Washington debated options. It describes an Obama administration failing to take action until it was, quote, too late. That makes sense when you look back at what President Obama said during a 2012 debate. Watch.
When you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back.
Remember that one? Well, Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry is live in Washington with the story for us tonight. Ed.
Trish, that's an oldie but goodie. The whole narrative about Russia has centered on the assumption that President Trump and his advisors have been too supplicant to Russian President Vladimir Putin and his government dating back to the last campaign. This Washington Post report is suggesting that during the administration of President Barack Obama, Russian aggression and provocations went unchecked for years. All of it spelled out in an FBI counterintelligence probe dubbed Northern Night that documents examples of those provocations by Moscow that were ignored by Washington. The paper declaring, quote, U.S. intelligence and law enforcement agencies saw some warning signs of Russian meddling in Europe and later in the U.S., but never fully grasped the breadth of the Kremlin's ambitions. Top U.S. policymakers did not appreciate the dangers, then scrambled to draw up options to fight back. Who can forget early in the Obama years, new Secretary of State Hillary Clinton literally pushing the reset button, hoping for warmer relations with Russia. And much later in the second term, National Security Advisor Susan Rice actually tried to justify why the Obama team was trying to walk a fine line with Vladimir Putin by not pushing back too hard.
Don't you understand that perspective of Americans who may not be in the foreign policy establishment who say, when is enough enough? I mean, when do you confront Putin at some point and call him on all this?
We have confronted him, and we do call him on it, and the president is very plain and very forceful in his dealings with Putin. But it's not necessary, nor is it our interest, to return to a Cold War construct, which is long out of date and that doesn't reflect the realities of the 21st century.
Interesting, since for most of the past year, Democrats have charged it's President Trump who's been too soft on Putin and colluded with his government in the 2016 campaign. Yet the year is now ending with no evidence of collusion, and the Trump administration has actually recently cracked down on Russia on a number of key fronts. Most notably, the White House just approved a plan to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine to help them deal with Russian-backed separatists, something the Obama administration never did, despite desperate pleas from the Ukrainians. And last week, the Trump administration imposed those new sanctions on 5 Russians, leading Kremlin officials to tell state media that Putin is getting a little concerned. Trish?
Yeah, you know, Ed, I think one of the first times I ever met you was actually at the Lobster Summit in Kennebunkport, Maine. And that was when you had Putin and Bush coming together, and it was a big deal. And that was a time, yes, when people were actually pretty concerned about Russia. You think about Condoleezza Rice, for example, and her background in Russian studies. And Russia was certainly front and center on everyone's mind. And people seemed, at least to me at that time, to be a little bit more aware of Vladimir Putin and the threat he might have represented.
You're right. They were wary then at the end of the Bush administration and wary at the beginning of the Obama administration. But I think what binds it together is that when you talk about that Lobster Summit, that was the first President Bush bringing Vladimir Putin to his estate at Kennebunkport for the lobster so that his son, George W. Bush, could maybe open up warmer relations with Putin. And a lot of people said, hey, that might be a good idea. The Obama administration, as I said, with the reset button, they tried to do that too. What's different now is the Trump administration has talked about, look, we could have warmer relations with Russia. They could help us with Syria, North Korea. And people have said, no, this is about collusion. You shouldn't have warmer relations with them. And I think that's why there's some frustration in the White House with no evidence, at least not yet, of collusion to say, wait, the last 2 administrations tried to have warmer relations. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, good point. I know I'm going to see you tonight, 11 p.m. You're going to be hosting all week at 11 Eastern, in for Shannon.
All right, let's get some lobster in the new year.
Deal. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Ed. All right, here right now with more, Michael Caputo, former Trump campaign senior advisor, and Michael Starr Hopkins, Democratic strategist who served on President Obama and Hillary Clinton's presidential campaigns. Good to see you both. I'll start with you, Mr. Caputo. You know, it seems as though, as Ed points out, that various administrations have tried to reset, if you would, with Russia. But what troubles me is that during the Obama administration, while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, decisions about Russia, including Uranium One and the passage of that deal, they were made despite, I think, what were very real concerns about Putin's territorial ambitions and the reality that Ukraine was going to be facing sooner or later. How come?
Well, when I lived in Russia in the 90s, it was in, I guess, 1995 when the Russians were kind of forced to sign a treaty where they gave up Crimea. And I remember liberals, communists, conservatives, every politician in Russia said to themselves, to each other, that they were someday going to have Crimea back. That was always going to be, it was going to happen. It was always going to be in the cards. And somehow or another, the Obama administration took their eye off the ball. Mm-hmm. And it was during their siege of Ukraine that they really honed their skills in this online warfare with Twitter and Facebook and all the other online tools they have. And they've turned those tools on us.
Michael Starr Hopkins, you think about how we used to fight more of a propaganda war, especially during the Cold War era. And then that kind of came to a halt back in 1999, at least on our side. But the Russians kept it going. And no one, for whatever reason, really cared or seemed to notice. How come?
I think that's partly true. We, I think, lost our focus when it came to Russia. I will say, however, the Obama administration put harsh sanctions on the Russian economy. And then Jay Johnson, during the 2016 election, attempted to have our election system determined as critical infrastructure so that then it would be federally taken on instead of having states deal with it. And that was something Mitch McConnell stopped him from doing. So I think both sides have a little blood on their hands.
Well, you know, one of the questions I have is why the heck nobody noticed what was going on, Michael Caputo? Why is it that no one in the Obama administration said, wait a second, they are trying to influence things? I mean, they were getting reports. We have learned of this in the final months of the Obama administration, in the final year, and yet nobody responded to these in a way that you should if they're trying to influence our elections.
Well, the Obama administration had an ambassador in place in Russia named Michael McFaul. Even though I disagree with the ambassador McFaul on a lot of things, he knows a lot about Russia, and there's probably no one more plugged into what goes on in Russia. So I'm quite sure that Ambassador McFaul sent up flares time and again. And, of course, our national security apparatus was aware that they were tinkering and poking at a lot of our computer systems. And we all have known for many years that some of the best, or worst in this case, internet scammers in the world are in Russia, especially hackers and the like. So the signs have always been there. I think it's quite true that Obama and his administration didn't follow through, perhaps, on a lot of this online activity, these online active measures of the Kremlin. And the commentary in 2012 about, we saw it on the tape earlier, about how Romney was insulted about saying Russia was on the top of his list of national security concerns. It really came back into play again just after the Ukrainian invasion. And unfortunately, it doesn't appear that we really kept up. And in July of 2016, when the hack of the DNC emails came out, I sent up the alarm then that this was most likely Russia. And in fact, something needed to be done about this stat. And nothing was. Well,
I can remember 10 years ago, one of the cover stories of the CFR journal was by Yulia Tymoshenko, who was then, of course, in the Ukrainian government. And she was, pleading for some help, saying that this is the goal of Vladimir Putin. This is the goal of Russia, to have a bigger presence in Europe and, in fact, to take parts of the Ukraine. So a lot of questions as to why nobody cared about it until perhaps it was too late. But before I let you go, Michael Caputo, you actually worked for the Kremlin. You spent years working in Russia. Then you were on the Trump campaign. I know that you've certainly been questioned by authorities. What is your response when they say, what role did Russia have in the election?
Yeah, I worked in Russia for the 90s during the Yeltsin administration and worked with the Kremlin closely in those days on elections and Western corporate market entry. And I actually founded and put together the Rock the Vote Russia project, which brought young people out to vote in droves in 1996. Mm-hmm. But when Vladimir Putin came in, those of us who were advising the Yeltsin administration were quickly sent packing. In fact, most Western advisors were sent out during that time.
Did you ever see any contact with the Russians while you're on the campaign?
No. When I was interviewed by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, they asked me that question. I said, I've known President Trump since 1988. I worked more closely with him in the last several years. But we had one conversation, only one conversation about Russia, and he asked me what was it like to work there, and I told him, and we changed the topic to the NFL after that. Well, no one ever, during the entire time I was at that campaign, ever asked me one question about my 7 years in Russia. That's why it's my opinion that there's no collusion.
I just want to make one point really quickly. Really quickly, yes. I just want to say President Trump's comments about rigging the election made it really hard for President Obama and Jeh Johnson to respond to some of the hacking of Russia because they were worried about the politicization of, bringing it into the media's network and explaining to the American people what was going on. So, I don't think President Trump did the American people a service by making it so political.
Thank you so much.
We probably have to look at doing that again.
Good to see you both. Thank you very much.
Just in, the British government fearing new tensions with the White House after reportedly hearing Prince Harry had perhaps invited former President Obama to his wedding, but did not extend an invitation to President Trump. The Prince and the Obamas bonded at the Invictus Games in Canada. When asked about the possible invitation during an interview he did with President Obama, Prince Harry dodged the question, saying he didn't know. So let's talk about all of this with Niall Gardner, director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Would it be a huge breach of diplomatic protocol in Britain for the Prince to invite the former president to his wedding, but not the sitting president?
I think it would be very unusual, and certainly there are a number of reports in London indicating that government advisors have strongly suggested to the royal family that an invitation not be extended to Barack Obama. My sense is that I think the royal family will want to avoid any sort of political controversy over the royal wedding, which takes place on May 19th at Windsor Castle. And I would very much doubt, actually, that Barack Obama would, in fact, be invited. But there's a lot of speculation at the moment in the United Kingdom. And without a doubt, I think this is a sort of hot-button political issue at the moment with a potential for significant controversy.
Let me play just a little bit of an interview. This is kind of an unusual interview that the BBC did because the interviewer is Prince Harry and his guest is Barack Obama. I want to play this for you.
You've sat through the inauguration with your game face on, not giving much emotion away, as we all saw. What's going through your mind?
The sense that there was a completion and that we had done the work in a way that preserved our integrity and left us whole, and that we hadn't fundamentally changed, I think was a satisfying feeling. Now, that was mixed with all the work that was still undone.
So he's telling the former president there that he had his game face on at the inauguration. Ultimately, this is kind of all up to the Queen, is it not? I mean, it may be Harry's wedding, but she's kind of the one who rules yes or no on the guest list.
Well, certainly the Queen has a big say in this. Ultimately, I think that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will be the deciders in terms of the final invitation list. But the British government, although it has a consultative role, does also have a strong say in this matter as well. And I think the British government will be very concerned about any political fallout from an invitation being extended to Barack Obama, but not to President Trump. It's also important to bear in mind, actually, that Barack Obama himself is a very controversial figure in the United Kingdom, not least because of his warnings against Brexit in advance of the UK referendum. He also warned the British people they would be at the back of the queue if they voted for Brexit. And so Barack Obama is known as a very anti-Brexit figure. And I think that is also going to loom large, actually, with regard to this overall debate. He also had a track record as US president of not exactly being the strongest friend for Great Britain. In fact, his administration sided with Argentina over the Falklands question, a very sensitive issue for the British people. And so President Obama's own track record when it comes to Great Britain isn't exactly particularly stellar.
But Theresa May, the sitting prime minister, she's had her own issues, I guess you would say, with President Trump.
Certainly, there have been, some disagreements between Theresa May and President Trump. But overall, I would say the special relationship is actually very, very strong. You do have a U.S. administration at this time that is very pro-British, very pro-Brexit. And I think that overall, the relationship between Washington and London is very, very powerful at this time. And certainly the British government, I think, will be very keen to ensure that the US-UK special relationship continues to be extremely strong in the coming years. So certainly this is going to be a very interesting debate that's going to take place in the UK in the coming months. But my sense is that Barack Obama probably won't be going over to the royal wedding.
Niall Gardner from the Heritage Foundation. Niall, good to have you on. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.